To get him, he just latched me on the belly.
So you say, but if you can, you get a stick, you shove it in his mouth.
Then I went to put my gumboot in his mouth and he just fucking bit through that. So I had a bit foot and a bit in the stomach.
Right. Morning, everyone.
It's going to get badly.
And an expensive vet bill.
Yeah. Hopefully he's working.
Start a big week of workshops this week, so hopefully you all had a wonderful agenda meeting. I do have some apologies and a very amusing email from Nathan, which I see you have all received as well, so he will not be joining us today. Sarah will be joining online. Tracy will be late, and Cheryl is online. Good morning, Cheryl. Bob, you haven't heard from Charlie? Morning. I've sent him a text, so he's not joining us today. But first up, reflections on Te Korowai, Delia and Sas. Welcome. You're up front. Very first cab off the rank. Well, you know, they get to the bitter end as well. Te Korowai, we did have a workshop with LK and Mark, who came down from LGNZ. And we thought after that, we probably just needed to firm up a bit of what was going to happen next. So I thought we could recap, and once the slides are on screen, we can recap how Te Korowai went before we move on to the next steps. Oh, things are happening. So overall, our rating was, thanks, Wayne. Beautiful. Oh, it's working perfectly. Overall, our rating was Maori 2, which is active. So that was on a scale of 4 ratings, so that's second highest. And over the 4 pillars, we got 3 Maori 2 and 1 Maori Ora, which was in communications and engagement. And some of the highlights, which pulled out from the report, were that we recognised the need for continuous improvement. There's financial literacy growing across the organisation. The transition from mayor to mayor, seamless and successful. The new community outcomes are strongly embraced, and we have a commitment to using information services effectively. So there were some really good things that were brought up before we get into the things that weren't. So areas for improvement. So resource consenting, evolution required to deal with increasing complexity, which is something that we are well aware of. There were some key themes around assets. So depreciation funding came up, as well as insurance for infrastructure. Clarifying what good looks like for business cases. So that includes options analysis, and especially for those big things that we're looking at doing, and there'll be some of those brought up in workshops today and on Wednesday through the LTP, just making sure that we are really clear what the case is for investment. District-wide funding. So you all may remember that this process came hot on the heels of districtisation. So there was a lot of chat with the assessors back in August about districtisation. So that came up both internally and sort of with community board engagement as well. And continuation of asset management systems upgrades, which have been going swimmingly. So our key, sorry, do you have any questions on those areas for improvement before moving on? Our key strengths, we have very committed staff, the organisation, and the connection to the district, strong leadership, competent councillors who work together as a team. Nice to hear. The decision to form a water CCO was really well received by the assessors, and they mentioned our pragmatism about joining up with neighbouring councils was really. And we've got a robust balance sheet with an extensive but low-cost roading network. That was a top finding there. So the next steps then, what will we do with both those key findings from strengths and improvements. We're going to analyse and understand those focus areas, engage with relevant teams so that they understand what's needed next, develop action plans, complete actions, and then ensure we're reporting quarterly to both ELT and council. And amongst that, we're going to have some ongoing monitoring so we can actually make sure that everything is going swimmingly. So rather than just reporting, we'll be monitoring, which means getting in there and checking in with teams on progress, what's happening, and whether we need to actually pivot on some of these things because the world around us is changing quite rapidly. So just to dive into some of the areas for improvement in those specific pillars. In governance, leadership and strategy, there was a request to embed the community outcomes throughout strategies that we have and the service delivery. So they were really happy that we are well aware of the community outcomes and we use them frequently, but they couldn't see that those were threaded throughout all our strategic documents. They talked about a development programme for elected members, which you will hear a little bit more about later. Community board engagement, so development of the approach post-digitisation. So that was, again, as mentioned previously, quite a big theme, and I think it was just the timing of this that made that quite a big discussion. Manageable meeting packs supported by use of technology along with business cases, linkage of the chief executive KPIs with the community outcomes and strategies, and increased risk discussion. So getting risks discussed alongside everything else rather than just as a standalone item. So from that, we've got both new actions and existing work programs. So we've got new actions include the development of your development program. So that's going to be considered in the LTP. Community board engagement. So we're going to review the guidance given to staff on community board engagement under district-wide funding. And we're going to make some progress with technology assistance on meeting packs, chief executive KPIs, and developing the risk structures and risk register. So there's some key work going on there that will hopefully help in the risk appetite space as well. So existing work programs, we've already got the community outcomes and strategic priorities being utilised through the LTP. So we've made good progress in that space. Business cases are being developed and will be rolled out with the new project management framework. And operational risk registers are under development. So will be able to be used to really push those risk conversations from bottom up rather than just top down. Any questions on this before I move on? So financial decision making and transparency. There was a lot of talk about scenarios. So that was both in a post-Waters position and exploration of what life would look like in an AF8 situation as well. So looking at our financial risks and what could happen in terms of debt headroom and available funding. Consideration of self-insurance or formal insurance for infrastructure assets. So that, again, you will hear a bit more in the LTP workshops about that. Ensuring depreciation is appropriately funded came up. Continuation of the bridge strategy and review of risk appetite, which we had a workshop in February, so that's moving on nicely. So in that, we've actually got quite a few new actions. So those are the scenario planning and exploring our financial resilience. Again, as mentioned in the LTP, we'll have a discussion about self-insurance versus formal insurance for bridge infrastructure, and the water underground infrastructure decision will be one to be made by Southern Waters. So we've patched that to be moved over to them. And funding for depreciation, again, that was kind of a Waters related situation. And I think we're pretty comfortable with how we are rating for depreciation outside those water assets. So we are unlikely to progress anything major in that space. And And as mentioned, risk appetite has been reviewed and will be submitted for adoption in June. So that will go to audit and risk at the start of June and then through to council at the end of June. Service delivery and asset management. As we all know, resource consent activity is increasing in complexity and number as well. There were a few mentions of water improvements, so both water and wastewater program and project management improvements required. They noted that our asset maturity is still evolving. And again, mentioned the bridge strategy and business case. So a few themes that came through across multiple pillars there. For new actions, we are in actually probably a less positive place than we were when the assessors came in terms of resource consent processing, just because of the loss of some staff in that area. So there is work going on to improve that capacity through the LTP, and at present we are really utilising the planning panel consultants to help us while we are low on numbers. Streamlining of project and programme management. So we are rolling out a framework and we will be having new resources and tools which will include business cases for staff. Existing work programmes. Work to improve water supply standards is always ongoing, as well as wastewater treatment options. So at the time those assessors were in, we weren't actually sure of the direction on wastewater, so things have moved on since then. In the asset management space, we have done some training on AMPs. We think they'll be consistent across all areas, which is a great step forward. And we are working to ensure that AMPs and strategies are well linked through this LTP. Bridge strategy work will continue. That currently sits in the roading AMP. So that will have review through the LTP and see whether that needs to be brought as a standalone piece. And that business case piece is back again. We'll be rolling it out. So comms and engagement, whilst we did have a really great score in this, there were still areas for improvement. So one of those was that consultation items need to be strongly communicated out. So that's something that the comms team will be working on. Communication with community boards. I think we've made progress in that space through the LTP so far, with this being the first one where everything is district funded. Social media guidance and mitigations for elected members. So that is something that we'll work on. Improved confidence that communication is well directed was an internal thing, and improvement to accessibility of our public website is something that the comms team is already working on. So the comms team will look at that consultation piece. So what does it look like once we've had consultation? How do we communicate out really clearly what the outcomes of that was? Development of a social media policy. So that will come to you guys at some point in the near future. We do have guidance, but we don't have a policy, and that's something that they did pick up on. And communication strategy work is underway and will be progressed. So that's going to hopefully help with that well-directed public contact. So these were like the specific things that were brought up, so we can quite easily work on those. But in addition to that, one of the things that was quite clear through the report was that we need to link everything together. So they described it as the golden thread. So how are we linking together our visions? So district vision, organisational vision, community outcomes, the LTP, our overarching strategy and other strategies, as well as district-wide funding. So that's something that we will be looking at. So as a lens over all these actions is, are we still making progress in making that golden thread work for us? And it'll just be a question we keep coming back to make sure that things are appropriately linked and that key documents talk to each other. So next steps will be to develop those action plans, establish quarterly reporting to ELT and to council and complete ongoing monitoring till everything nicely ticked off this list. Any questions?
I have a question for elected members. Do you feel that overview covers your conversation that you had with the assessor? Are we missing anything that is covered in your conversations or from a governance perspective?
I can't help thinking that we didn't need to go down here, and everything they've said is what we've already known. You probably know at ELT level. And my question would be, when does it stop? Because
And simplify another government.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess we paid for that ultimately, don't we?
Yeah.
And I'm saying that everything in there is what we've been focusing on really hard in the last 5-6 years, and the ELT team have done a fantastic job. And I'm going, well, it can stop now, because all those actions developing those is being done, and we scored well, and like we've done. And we're now going to really muddy terms. I just don't feel like we need to be responsible, feeling we're responsible to them when we're doing a pretty good job ourselves. I guess what happens to the next plan with the Korowai? Are they finished now that they've done their last presentation?
Exactly, and it's up for elected members, whether that proposal from Amelia around the actions that we have ongoing oversight on this table, which we think makes sense, and a decision point for elected members be whether or not we, and is it 2 years? 3 years?
3 years.
3 years, go
Yeah.
through the program again. That's completely sits with this table, and as Peter indicated, that this table might look different with
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess.
We've done all that work, and I think we don't want to get to the point where we go, oh, well, we've done that now, and then we start sliding. We do want to strive for continuous improvement at this council, to be building on what we've done in the past and keep getting better. And I think there's some accountable actions in there that are quite easier to keep a hold of and measure now that we've got that kind of baseline, as opposed to before, where we just thought we were doing quite well, but we didn't get that baseline to really highlight. And I guess that'll be a conversation that comes back in a couple of years as to what the Korowai program looks like then, and whether it is still the right fit for us, and whether we want to reassess under the same provisions, or whether we are a completely different entity, who knows. But I think in the interests of continuing to improve, that's the right mechanism.
With all the other things you do, Amelia, do you have sufficient capacity to keep working on this?
Yes, so really my role in this will be kind of to facilitate and make sure that other people are doing the actions. But luckily, all the actions will be with key owners, so I won't have to deliver too many. So
Yeah, sorry, even not delivering them, but
Yeah.
to be over the top of it and sure it's being implemented.
Do have the corporate planner role that's under Amelia now, so that's Biddy. That's been into this council before, so that's an area that that Amelia may wish Biddy to be in and to be monitoring it, and supporting Amelia with that. So yeah, I feel from a GM perspective that we do have the capacity. It's just a matter of prioritising our work programs. To bring this back to you on a quarterly basis.
And I guess the question you asked is there anything in that as staff or elected members or Peter that you found that was a surprise? Or is it you understood where the issues may have been, whether it be planning or, we're always getting told consultation continually with our communities and our community boards. And like, is there anything that stood out for you? Going, I didn't think we were doing too bad there and we've got a surprise, or was it business as usual, just keeping an eye on it?
if there were any real surprises, to be fair.
I thought we'd score worse in finances, but maybe that's because I sit in that space and have a bit more of a, maybe a bit of a dark hat on there. So I was pleasantly surprised but we have done heaps of work, as you guys know, from this table in the last few years, really trying to improve our financial acumen and the reporting that we bring to this table. So yeah, I think pleasantly surprised with how we went there.
One thing that surprised me, the push for the earthquake and funding or depreciation insurance, because we have an earthquake of that magnitude, the government will be picking up a fair bit of the cost. And And do we have to plan for the worst case scenario where we fit into that? Because we won't know what happens until after. So it's very hard on staff to go, well, it's going to only come to Clyde or it might only go to Roxburgh. Well, it's a hard question to answer when we're sitting here with a 4% rate rise and we don't even know where the earthquake's going to strike. And we can lose a lot of time and effort sitting there because if it does major, the government's got a East Coast with the floods. It's a different ball game than what you ever thought it might be. Canterbury's the same, I guess, wasn't it? Like you don't know what you don't know, I guess I'm saying.
I've got a little slot this afternoon to talk to you guys about that because of course that goes hand in hand with a rates cap and our debt ceiling. And that is a decision for this table to make around the level of risk that you're prepared to take around that self-insurance. During our presentations this afternoon.
Is this something that we are required to do, or is it just something that we've chosen to do?
So I'm sure there's probably more people in this room who can give you a better history, but it's not something we're required to do, but it was something that the community a few years ago were really keen for us to do when it was called Council Mark. So Council Mark has evolved into Korowai. And yes, there was some strong voices in the community that wanted us to undertake this assessment, but no, we're not required to do it.
And they got the assessment that they didn't want.
Yeah.
They got a very well functioned, very well organised council.
Yeah.
And they weren't happy with aspects of the council. And I would love to have a cup of tea with them one day.
Any other questions? Thank you. Appreciated. Moving on to the next very fun topic that won't be contentious at all, private water supplies. Welcome, Julie.
Not as contentious as swimming pools.
No, not a trolling this year.
Yep.
How do I get it from here up to there?
Oh, Wayno.
Yeah.
So, this is just to give you an update on where we're at with these drinking water supply assessments. So just a reminder of why we had to do this. This is in the Local Government Water Services Act 2021. Prior to that, it was in the Water Services Act 2021. It didn't have a date when we had to do it by in the 2021 Act. So we have to have our first assessment done by the 1st of July 2026 for drinking water only. And it's important to note that in the legislation, they refer to two different organisations being territorial authorities and water service providers. Now, a water service provider can be a council if the council's still delivering water services in the future, but if they're handing it over to if they've set up a CCO, then the CCO is called a water service provider. This piece of legislation doesn't shift the responsibility for doing these assessments to the water service provider. It very clearly states it stays with the territorial authority. And I'll explain why I think that is to you as we go through. You are able to get another organisation to do that assessment on your behalf, but the legal responsibility for it stays with the council. The other important thing to note is that stormwater and wastewater have to be done by the 1st of July 2029. So all three services have to be assessed, but drinking water's first, which follows the pattern of everything to do with Three Waters and the drinking water regulator. So the assessment at a very high level, I'm not going to give you all that legal jargon around this, but basically what we have to do is identify all the properties that need drinking water. We then have to identify where they get their water from, what could go wrong, what kind of the aspects of quality and safety of that water supply, and if it goes wrong, what's the backup plan? So we can go down quite deep down the rabbit hole, or we can keep it higher. And this assessment's going to be keeping it quite high. Yeah, it's going to be keeping it quite high because we just don't have enough data to go down the rabbit hole at this point. So some definitions. So this, in previous conversations with you, there's been quite a lot of conversation around this. So I thought it'd be worth just going through what the definitions are, and I'll come up on some graphs in this. So a domestic self-supply is a private supply. In this district, it's got one dwelling and they are not required to be registered with the Drinking Water Authority. Te Mara Arawai. A shared domestic supply is a new definition that got added in as part of the 2025 Act. There was an amendment to the 2021 Act that added this in, and this was kind of the national government, coalition government change, where they said if there's less than 25 consumers on a supply, they don't have to be registered. So basically, if it's 10 houses or less, it meets the calculation for less than 25 people. So that's quite an important change that they made. Then we have these things called a community supply. Now, community supply can be a private supply or it could be a council supply. But basically, a community supply is everything else that has more than 25 people on it, or it's a commercial public community facility. So halls, rural hotels, cafes that are in rural areas would be termed a community supply. So they are, if they're private, they're required to be registered by the 15th of November 2028. The 2025 Act pushed that date out 2 years, what previously it was 2026. And then there's the council supplies that are also community supplies, and we've been required to be registered since 2021. So it means that there'll be quite a bit of a flurry of activity in the next couple of years, while all these larger community supplies get their ducks in a row. In the terms of this presentation, when I refer to private supplies, they're all the supplies that are not run, owned or operated by council. So the water services assessment, what's going to be used for, it actually spells out in the Act what it's got to be used for. So I think what's important for councils and why it's probably stayed with councils and not moved across to the water services provider is it's required to be considered as part of your district planning. And so by it would be consents as well. So if you're issuing consents for properties to connect to private water supplies, you should be looking at the drinking water assessment to say, is there a problem with that water supply before you're signing off and saying, yeah, it ticks the box for connection there. It's council's also got a broader duty to improve, promote and protect public health in the district, and that's in the it's noted in the Local Government Act 2025, but it's also in the Public Health Act or something like that. They're going to be used by the Water Services Authority, Te Mara Arawai. We have to legally provide it to them. It's got to go up on our website as well and be publicly available. And through the process of doing this, if we identify any issues of concern or a supply that might be failing, we're legally required to advise the water regulator of that as well. So, there's just a couple of legal responsibilities there.
In your view, be a supply that's failing, is it one that's failing to meet drinking water standards or failing to supply the physical?
I'll probably, can I come back to that at the end?
Yeah.
There's some issues around our ability to access data. So it's also got to be used as considered as part of setting the statement of expectations for a water CCO. And it also has to be used by water CCOs when developing a water services strategy. So our project approach so far has been really a whole lot of data collection and discovery and trying to find out what we can find out. Where we're actually up to now is that phase 4 where we're gone out with a survey to the community. And then the last phase will be actually doing a full assessment and writing it up. So a lot of time to pull this together. So the first thing we had to do was identify communities because we had to do the assessment for each community. And it's like, well, how do we define a community? So what we've done is actually use the Statistics New Zealand mesh blocks, and we'll kind of group areas that way. And then we can say what are the issues with water supply in that area? Where do people typically get their water from and what could be the risks associated with it? And we're kind of hoping that a lot of this will be quite generic. And so our first cut of who gets drinking water and where it comes from, what we did was we got information from council's rating database. We then subtracted all the properties that are serviced by council, so they get a rate on the council supply. We took out any properties that didn't have any improvements or a building on them. And then that basically has given us a list of properties where we think they probably need water, but we don't. We then went to Te Mara Arawai. Now, under the legislation, Te Mara Arawai are required to provide any information they have around water supplies in the district to us to enable us to do this exercise. That was a real mission, getting that information. It took about 5 months probably of communicating with them to get that. We've finally got it. And we've also been to the ORC and got all that all consent and land use data. So there's been kind of a cross-referencing of all this information to filter out a group of properties that we need to be looked at.
There was a Te Mara Arawai being slow. Do you think it was because they didn't have the systems to report to you? Or they were reluctant to report?
I got the politest go away email I've ever had in my life. I thought I might cut and paste it perhaps for the future for myself. It was our priorities changed, and this isn't high on our priorities at the moment, basically, which was interesting given they sent letters from the law last year telling you that this had to be done by the 30th of June this year. But I think that the task of getting the information out of their database was much bigger than they thought it was going to be. That's what I did. Because we actually need all the detail around the supplies. It's not just what they are. So where are the private supplies? So the orange bars show the ones that are private that we are registered. So we've got a bit of information on them. And the blue ones are all the other ones that we don't really know anything about. So that kind of gives you a bit of a context of how much we just don't know, which makes it quite hard to do this exercise. And you'll see that Alexandra Clyde Basin, probably a lot of rural, anywhere where there's quite a bit of rural residential development, lifestyle blocks, are those areas where there's a lot more people connected to water that we don't know too much about. So the registered supplies, I'm just on those, and I've got the numbers here. I think there's, is it just how many are actually registered and how many are. So there's 35 supplies that are registered or in the progress of getting registered that have over 25 properties on them. And the largest of those would be part of the Heiser, which has saying 300 people on it. This flat, I think, is one sort of the second largest at about 150. And then there's 58 that are registered that are under 25 people. So they don't actually have to be registered, but I think they probably got this when the previous government requirements were in place. But there's quite a lot that are sitting in that 20 to 18 sort of 24.
So how do you determine the numbers? Because you take lots of material, it may only have, but some, well, it's probably growing now to be fair, but they might be of two different schemes.
Yeah.
And it might only be holiday makers, so it's 25, like where does that,
so
Athens or there'll be places, Danzy's Pass, for example, could be, I don't know, but.
So typically, and I see even on Te Mara Arawai's guidelines, they say a household is calculated at 2.5 people typically. And there's requirements in the legislation on the number of days. If there's more than a certain number of days that the population exceeds a certain level, then you actually tip over, I think it's 60 days.
It's hard to work out in some of these.
Yeah.
Because Central Otago by nature is a holiday destination.
Yeah. But you're right, it is hard to establish. And I think some of these might have actually counted the number of properties, not the number of people.
Yeah. Because it's like really in our corner, there'll be a lot of little
Yeah,
places like Cambridge or all those, there could be 4 or 5 different takes and you don't know where they're from.
I know.
But, you know, like it just can really put angst into a community. We go, well, actually, you're a supplier. Well, no, I'm
Yeah.
not. And there will be a lot of people that, and I'm going to say in this Batman's corner, where they might come off a really good intent to have a supply and they'll go, no, we're not going to do it anymore. Because so it's really going to be tricky.
Yeah, and some of those are not necessarily registered either.
No. And they will probably hard to get them to register.
Well, yeah. There's some, I'll talk about penalties. I'm not doing what you're required to do. So just in terms of numbers of properties, there's, 13,360 that have been identified as needing water. You can see from those bars across the bottom kind of where we've got the information from. Sorry, it's not very easy to read, but this has been sent out to you. Most people are on a council supply. The numbers, it's about a quarter, just over a quarter of people that don't get their water from council. But if you're interested, you could probably look at it on what got sent out to you. What we've been doing is actually mapping them where they are in the district, and then they're kind of a dot on a map that there's a water supply we think here, and then if you zoom in, it gives you a bit of information about what that supply is. That's actually bringing up a Turihoa there, which says it's got 35 properties estimated to be connected to it. That's the level of detail that we've got. So in terms of filling the gaps, we've got this survey out at the moment. It's running from the 8th of May to the 8th of June. So all the properties that are not connected to council supply that we identified as needing water have either got an email or a letter outlining the reason why we're doing this, and a link to the Let's Talk survey. So the survey is actually different if it's you go in and your first question is, where do you get your water from? Is it the single, just for your property, or for many properties? And then it goes down different questions depending on what the previous answers have been. So it's largely tick box. I did it last week because I'm property that should be answering this. And if you're a self-supply, it's actually really quick to do. Tells us where people get their water from, which is quite helpful. And the information that's being collected is the address of the property. If there's single or multiple properties on that supply, we need to know what the source of water is, what the protection of the headworks is. So if it's a bore, is it protected from stock so that not kind of raising all over the top of your bore and you can get some contamination like happened up in Hadlock North. What kind of monitoring gets done? Is there any treatment? And if there is treatment, what is that? If it has any backflow protection on it, risk management and past incidents that there might have been on the supply. And then if you're an owner or an operator of a community supply, if you aren't ticked yes to that question, you'll get asked some additional questions around the number of properties, the population, whether it's got a distribution network, which means it's piped to other properties or not, and any future upgrades that are planned on that.
Just Julie, with that, obviously when you talk about a distribution network, does it say the actual information? Is it really easy for people to understand? It doesn't say a distribution network, it says a pipes
network. It says a piped network.
A piped network.
It's been gone over by the non-technical people to try to keep it
that's right.
simplified.
Yeah. That's
the intent anyway, as much as we can. I mean, it'll ask you some questions around filtration and you might not know, but you can say I don't know if you don't know. Typically, if you don't know, it probably doesn't have any filtration on it. So once again, this first assessment's really around identifying any data gaps that we've got. It's being done at a relatively high level for each community area. We won't be able to get into every single supply and understand the risks around it. We'll be looking at what are the types of supplies in that mesh block area and approximate numbers of properties connected. and we'll do a catchment level risk assessment. So we might know that in a particular catchment, a lot of people are getting their water from bores, and we might know that the ORC monitoring bores in that area have that there's high nitrates, for example, that would be identified as a risk for that aquifer, or the Alexandra Clyde area. We know in the past that that's quite got quite a high allocation on that aquifer, that there's probably going to be a point in time where there won't be enough water if everyone was taking everything that they could take from it. And then we'll have a backup plan. The backup plan is probably going to be largely quite generic. That might be tankered water could be provided, or people could buy their water from town supplies and tanker it to their properties if they had to. Any questions around that? Sort of the completeness and the quality of the information will improve in subsequent assessments.
There'll be quite a few community supply organisations that have a lot of that.
Yeah.
So you're just going to go direct to them? Or?
Yeah, well, we don't get that. Even when we get the information from Te Mata Arawai, if they've got a water safety plan, we haven't.
That's what I mean, like these groups have already given that to Te Mata Arawai.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, it's quite challenging.
Yeah.
I think we thought it would probably be easier for us to contact the water suppliers once they've answered the survey, because we don't even know who the contact people are sometimes. So the final steps will be that we get the report done. It then has to be adopted by council. So there'll be a report come up to you. We've got to publish it and make it available on our website. And we've got to submit the electronic copy to Te Mata Arawai. So we're just not going to meet the June meeting to get this done and adopted by the 1st of July. We'll probably be aiming for August in all reality. And if Te Mata Arawai to us, will be just bringing to their attention the amount of time it took them to provide information to us that slowed the project down.
Or you can use the excuse.
Yeah. Like we did a Lagoi, when we first asked for it, we got told we had to Lagoima it, which seemed a bit odd given it was a legal requirement in the legislation that they would. Yeah. And they certainly didn't respond to the Lagoima within 20 working days. So the next, you have to do this every 3 years. It's not a once off. It's going to be ongoing. So there's just some suggestions I would make to make this job easier in the future. Would be that when resource consents are being done for properties that are not connected to town supply subdividing, is that information around where they get their water from is actually put into GIS in a field, so that you can actually pull that information out when you go to do the next one and understand how many properties might be connected to these supplies. We used to actually require properties with more than, I think it used to be 20 properties, but the Act now would say 10 to be registered as a condition of consent, resource consent. We used to do sampling of groundwater around the district. The lady here that worked in sort of across planning and environmental health that did that, but it might be something that you should maybe consider reintroducing in the future to get a ORC are not doing adequate sampling, then it might be with council doing it in areas where there's high numbers of domestic bores. And what I would say is there needs to be a bit of consideration of who pays for this, because at the moment this is being paid. We are engaging a consultant to provide capacity support for us to get this work done. That's getting funded from the water budgets. The water budgets are funded by the urban people who are connected to council supplies. So who should be paying for this is kind of the question, because it's not people connected to council supplies that this piece of work is being done for. It's the people who are not connected to council supplies. So that could be a conversation you want to have in the future. And when it has to be done for wastewater and stormwater as well, it actually becomes quite a mammoth piece of work that needs to be done.
So, well, that might be an understanding. The ground is going to move on us. And this work could be all trying to, Tamara or I didn't relinquish their information because it was too busy for them. Why can't it just be too busy for us?
Yeah, you'll get fined. I'll give you the fines in a minute. They did send you a letter last year reminding you that this had to be done, which was interesting because we went away and looked in the legislation for the date and we couldn't find the date anywhere. And it's then subsequently got put into the 2025 revision.
So why does a private water supplier 10 connections, but the other one was 25
25.
25 people.
people? So that, well, why is the narrative the same then?
Sorry.
Well, why wasn't it 25 people there?
Because
why
I could have put 25 people, but I think 25 people is always a bit confusing. If you've got 10 connections on it, you've probably got 25 people. You know, I think you will get resource consents in for rural residential subdivisions where there might be already 8 properties on that supply. I think it's important that those people understand that by subdividing and putting more properties in, they're now triggering the point at which they have to be a registered water supplier.
Yeah.
Sorry, you go, Curtis.
That's like a lot of these people are already having to register with Te Mata Arawai anyway, so.
Yeah.
Back
Yes.
to the original point, why are they not working with us to lower the difficulty of this process for us? Because we're essentially doing it for them.
I would suggest that there's an awful lot more than 35 supplies in this district that have over 25 people on them. So I don't think they are all registering. I think some of them may not have registered, or they might have thought 25 consumers meant 25 properties. Not
But we
25
like
people.
we would be an example of that because
Everywhere.
Yeah.
I'm on an example.
Yeah, mixed
Shadow
irrigation
Creek, like,
schemes.
there are loads where they are sharing a bore between multiple properties
Yeah,
as
that's
opposed to having their own.
Yeah.
because but I mean I guess and knowing that like I don't know anything about Shadow Creek, but it could only be 6, but it could be 16, right? I guess you won't
No,
know.
it's higher.
Yeah, well,
Yeah, 'cause they-
which
because they-
surprised me.
Yeah.
And look, Chatter Creek might be on the list. I haven't.
But I mean, I guess like St Bathans, for example, there could be 3 or 4 takes in St Bathans, but they could actually come off the same landowner, but different takes. I mean, where does it get tricky there? And when the fire line comes out of the irrigation line and like it, and
Well, I'll tell you that St Bathans is one community that has contacted us in the past wanting us to step in. So, you know, it's.
which is fine, I mean, good on them.
Yeah.
Back to my question around the failing water supplies.
Yeah. I think I've got
Yeah,
to
that's
a
it.
slide out. There is, so we're not going to know from this assessment if they're failing or not, because we don't have enough information to know that.
But is it failing to meet the Te Mata Arawai standard imposed on them, or just a supply that's failing to provide even water itself?
They could be failing because they're not meeting the required levels of treatment. And I think when 2028 comes and it would be fair to say that Te Mata Arawai have not been resourced to undertake the scale of work that they've been required to undertake under.
For example, making the rules without the money.
So they've been very focused on councils. Last year, they started looking at schools, and you'd have seen there was a lot of reporting around schools with E. coli in their water and not meeting requirements. Once they kind of get councils, and they've been really focused on getting councils meeting their compliance requirements, then they will start moving their attention to the private water supplies that are required to be registered, and they'll start viewing their water safety plans. And I don't think that all of those supplies probably really aware of how the intricacies of meeting the legislative requirements, particularly around things like backflow prevention and having chlorination within their network. Something here in their reticulation networks. And they might think that they're compliant, but they may actually not be.
Seems to me that Te Mata are using us to gain, that they can't get the information, so they want us to go and find these people and let them know. But they don't want to pay for it.
And then once you give the information, we can pay for it.
In fact, we're even paying for the privilege because we pay a levy now to fund them as an organisation. But I think at the guts of it comes back to the fact that councils do district planning, they zone land for use. We do we authorise subdivision consents, and they're probably saying you at that level is where you will find the data, not at the tail.
It'll be easier going forward, but rather than they wanted historical information, which you might be able to get back 5 or 10 years, but that you've got to be hard work getting it, and then who pays for it?
Look, I'll tell you now, they're well aware that this district has one of the highest numbers of private water supplies in New Zealand. So, you know, don't think they might be casting their eyes here for looking at how they might want to do things in the future. You're not going to fly under the radar would be my advice. You know, Bill Bayfield, when he was
He might for 10 years.
CE of Te Mara Arawai, came here for a visit specifically to understand the
Yeah, lots of glass of water.
private supplies.
But they did change it to largely put that obligation on the water user to treat their own water for the smaller schemes.
Yeah. Yeah. And so point of use is absolutely valid.
So at the end of the day, all these companies need a water management plan, but the onus falls on the end user.
No, the
If
onus,
the company chooses to make the onus,
you've got to do your bit to make sure your user knows. And I don't think that's happened in a lot of places. Yes, that's really it for me. There is actually some really quite hefty fines. That fines, if you're a body corporate, are much higher than if you're an individual. They're in the $500,000 kind of range. Doing what you're required to do.
So in that situation where someone feels that they're going to be fined, or they've got an irrigation race, or they've used, not an irrigation, it's probably not the right word, but a supply that could have been historical, the first thing they'll do is go and sharpen their spade and say it's no longer a supply, and left with a whole lot of lifestyle as a holiday homes.
It's that difficult now.
It is for the person who doesn't want to be stuck on a register and have to be eligible for a fine of $500,000 because.
Yeah, but they've done a lot to help. As Curtis said, you can write letter. They've even got flow charts of how you do it. You know, you write a letter to everybody on it, telling them it's not a treated water supply. It's particularly around irrigation supplies. You know, I think they brought that in, the rural mixed use supplies, that you can shift the responsibility to the property owner to have treatment, but you have to tell them that they're required to put treatment on, and that it's a condition of supplying the water.
you have to make your best effort to facilitate.
Yeah.
So where do you get on with like an old railways water supply line that's been still there from probably the easement and the consents owned by New Zealand Railways, which hasn't been there since 1986? Because a lot of those places, like you might take Lauder or whatever, will possibly still be on. The school will be on the railway easement. I'm just saying, because there's a lot of that in Central Otago. People go, oh, it's not my scheme.
If there's less than 10 properties on it,
Don't matter.
it'd fly under the radar. There's more than 10 properties on it, or a hotel or something, then they could put point of use on their property, and that would cover them. It's more, the other thing is if there's a drought, and a lot of people take water from surface water takes around Central Otago, you know, there could be that there's not water available, that there could be aquifers that have high nitrates in them. It has certainly come up in the past from the ORC down around Ettrick and Waipiata spring to mind.
See, the positive of this is when you first put in change, it's hard to get, because you see, I've been drinking this water for 40 years. I'm happy. Why am I changing? You need to tell the story of where it benefits to you could be these things, or how you access tools. You need to determine what you need and to get them. I see the septic tanks one here, that's going to be way bigger than the water is. Whereas we get concentrated subdivision of these rural areas, or where's all your septic overflow going? You're worried about nitrates.
And it should be overlaying your wastewater assessment over your water assessment, and saying there's an awful lot of private water here, and there's an awful lot of waste septic tanks.
Yep. You can't have your septic outflow here.
I can confirm that the Let's Talk survey is very easy to fill out. I've just done it then.
Yeah.
Even dug out my resource consent for the board.
So what's the uptake been?
I've no idea.
Tested for nitrates.
Haven't had tests. I'm still here.
It's lips aren't blue. You're right.
It's like nitrates. It's nitrates can really affect pregnant women and unborn children. unborn children. So there's things that we might think, yeah, I've been fine, but it could be a different, person has underlying health conditions or something that can be.
Nitrates being our big issue here. Yeah. Get a lot more cows, mate.
Well, yeah, but I'm talking about arsenic as one that testing for the gold now. They're just drilling and looking for arsenic in the samples, and that's where the gold's sitting. So Pre-Vika, when their test done, it was terrible for arsenic in the water supply, just the one they've had for 100 years. And it's like we're all sitting on quartz, and it's probably where the gold is.
Explain a few things. Good to know.
So that's mine.
Thank you very much, Julie.
Thank you. Thank you, Julie. Yeah.
That's one thing.
Spread the word about everybody hopping online.
That's the thing about West Jubilee then, high in nitrate because it's snowmelt.
Yeah.
Snowmelt, snowmelt thing, a lot more nitrate in it.
Yeah.
It's very charged.
Okay, yeah.
Good morning.
James, how are you?
Good, thanks, Stu.
This is James from NZTA.
Everyone.
We've got a couple of people joining us online as well.
Perfect.
James?
Yeah, you're in control. I'm in control. Fabulous.
And we'll give you the power momentarily.
Dangerous.
Perfect.
Perfect. Right. Thanks very much for having me, everyone. Look, I want to start by saying, look, I acknowledge it's very late in the beginning of the trinium to pretend that this is the beginning of the trinium. Nonetheless, your calendar, my calendar, it is what it is. And what I wanted to run you through today, and thank you very much for the opportunity, is really just an opportunity to refresh everyone on where, frankly, the two planning cycles sit. Bit about us, NZTA, to begin with, but then really the guts of the land transport planning cycle, and how it does and does not, frankly, mesh. See Stu nodding already. Mesh with the local government planning cycle, and so what you can expect 12 months, what you should perhaps be looking out for over the next 12 months. What's likely to change, or what may stay the same, but could have been an opportunity to change had things fallen slightly differently. So, because you'll find yourselves probably, let's say, September next year with a lot more locked in place. And if you're raising issues to me, my saying that's great, but it's either in the plan or you're going to have to wait 3 years. We're approaching the point where things move much more fluidly, if they are going to move at all. So being aware of that, being clear on that, is, I think, the best way to arm you for meeting your ambitions and your community's ambitions. But first of all, look, just to start, and don't actually pretend that you're gonna read all this slide, but if you look at the blue boxes on the right, NZTA is a very large and complicated government agency, but those blue boxes really represent the way we increasingly think about our many and diverse roles in the land transport system. So running through them briefly, we are I won't say we are a planner of the land transport system. There are increasingly other agencies, particularly the central government, looking at infrastructure and different needs and how to balance things. But we try to centralise all of local government's plans, such as we know of them, our own plans, and try to hold a coordinated view of what the land transport system is likely to need over the next, let's say, 30 years. In terms of investment, we are in the process right now of updating our 30-year plan. If you're interested, I can direct you to the new version when it's out. But it's trying to capture everything from population growth pressures to resilience pressures to what's likely to be needed from an economic growth point of view. Where is earthquake risk? Where is the landslip risk? Where's flooding going to hurt us? What are the big pieces of infrastructure we're likely to need to think about over the next 30 years? It's not going to capture everything. It's certainly not going to get down to the level of where do we need to upgrade from a roundabout to a set of lights, but it is trying to capture the big sweep of the transport system over 30 years. The most frequent way lots of people, including councils, think of us as the second role as an investor. And we are the agency through which an enormous amount of money flows. And I will come to how the money flows because that's deeply important. But I do want to recognise again, we're not the only investor here. Local government is a substantial investor in the land transport system. We can lazily slip into language as central government as though we control all of the money, and we certainly don't in the transport system. And so we are more often than not, we should think of ourselves as a co-investor in the system alongside local government. We are a regulator, and I will come back to the regulatory function in a second because that deserves just picking out a bit. We deliver very large capital assets, large capital projects, usually for ourselves on behalf of the Crown in the state highway network, but not exclusively. We are about to kick off or move into delivering a project in Ashburton for a second bridge across the Ashburton River. That involves some state highway work, but we're delivering the project in its entirety because Ashburton District Council has no experience of how to do projects of that size. This is once in a generation work from their point of view, and we do it all the time. So we're more than happy to step into that space and partner with them to do it. And I can think of some projects I'd really like to get funded next cycle where, again, that might likely be the case because the regularity of very large capital investments for some councils is actually, it is generational. There is no expectation that you should be having the capability to be able to do it. And we can do that because we're good at it. We are an asset manager. It is worth saying that the state highway network is the Crown's single largest or single most valuable asset on the Crown's books. It's valued at just under $80 billion at the moment. And we take operating it very, very seriously. And increasingly trying to get the hierarchy of intervention correctly to make sure that we are squeezing the value we can out of the existing asset before we rock along and ask for money for something new, quite expensive to change it. Last but not least, the last one is by no means is not by any stretch of the imagination a statutory role or function, but we are trying to pay more attention to the fact that we are a customer service provider. If you rock up to us, you ring us, or you rock up to us, or one of our agents wanting a service, driver's license renewed, for example, to pay road user charges, we are not always the easiest agency in the world to deal with. We have old legacy systems that don't function the way perhaps brand new systems in this day and age function. We need to pay more attention to that, do what we can to drag ourselves into the present and to deliver the service that people expect of us. To be clear though, when I talk about customer service, we absolutely cannot confuse that with our role and duty of regulating people, and we can't get regulated parties like customers because that gets us into all sorts of trouble. Briefly on the regulatory role, we are the regulator of the land transport system. In some instances, we don't write those regulations. Very often we receive those regulations from the minister. It's the minister and the ministry that write them, consult on them, and then hand them. But we own and operate them. So we regulate drivers. Driver licensing is the most obvious way to think about that. And the system for driver's licensing in New Zealand is undergoing some changes right now. We regulate vehicles, their entry and their exit and their condition within the system. We regulate commercial transport. We are the rail safety regulator. Kiwi Rail is the biggest operator, but by no means only Kiwi Rail. If you're a tourist train operator running a tourist train once a year, you also deal with us from a safety point of view. That is over and above standard workplace health and safety regulation that WorkSafe does. We are the revenue collector, but we are only the revenue collector. And I'll come on more onto revenue, but we do not set the level of revenue. And that is extremely important when I talk about where the money comes from and how much money there is in the system. And last of all, we are the road network regulator in terms of what occurs on the road. Speed is a really good example, including of ourselves in terms of operating a state highway, although we structurally separate that so that there's some there, but we hold ourselves. We also hold you to account for the speed limits that you set on your local road network. And then before I get to structure and funding, just to, because it sets the scene for everything else, stepping back from that, it's important to understand we are a Crown agent. So we're not a government department. The Ministry of Transport is the minister's policy shop. That's the bit that advises the minister on what the system should be and writes the regulations usually. We are the deliverer of that policy. And as a Crown entity, we sit on the spectrum closest to government. So the Crown entity, you might think of something like Commerce Commission. They're very independent, they're semi-judicial, they sit quite a long way from government, and there's quite a lot of legislation about what government cannot tell something like the Commerce Commission to do. We're at the other end of the spectrum. We are just over the border from a department. Our job legally is to give effect to Crown policy. We have some narrow but really importantly defined independence from ministers. Our board is independent in its investment decisions. So it is up to our board to decide what project to spend money on when, but within the boundaries of giving effect to government policy. So when government tells us something is a priority, they usually these days get quite specific and tell us a particular area, particular piece of the transport system, particular road corridor, for example, is a priority. They can't go the next step and tell us exactly what to do on that piece of road unless they also give us the money and therefore take the independent funding decision away from us. That's important because the most common, most frequent, the most important expression of government policy that we then have to give effect to across a 3-year period is the document in my hand, the one on the screen, is the government policy statement on land transport. And this version, this current one, the operative one, was issued by Simeon Brown 3 or 4 months into the new year post the election last time. So coming on about this time 3 years ago. And it was quite a different document from the one that preceded it. And so Crown policy changed quite dramatically. Therefore, our behaviour in the system changed quite dramatically because what we were required to deliver was now suddenly different. I'll get into how it changes because the thing I want to impress on you today is how much things can change as we head towards, and Stu's already nodding because I've said this at the RTC, how much things can change as we head towards a new government policy statement. They are a 10-year document, but they are typically issued every 3 years. And the Minister of Transport, Chris Bishop, is busy drafting the next one now. So I would expect a draft to be issued by the Minister, broadly speaking, and I mean it only in the broadest of terms because I'm not here on the detail, sometime around the middle of the year. And that is probably your very first real opportunity as a council to see what policy might look like from next year, what funding might look like for next year, or what of your ambitions might be in, and what might frankly need to be changed in the text in order to make sure that your ambitions and your community needs are dealt with properly in the funding environment. Yeah.
So that could coincide with a regulatory role. We're going to be morphed into unitary authorities.
It may well. Yep. It's look, I recognise right now you've got many more issues on your table than transport.
So, but I guess what worries me is I've already got that plan of how we're going to be morphed into something already at your level on the table. But yet we're going to try to make some decisions around ours, but they've already got the outcome. And what happens if we ever change the government?
I'll get to changes the government in a minute because what I'll do is I'll run through what happened last time because there's quite a few intervention points between now and this getting finalised, let's say this time next year. The next 12 months are key in terms of locking down the next government policy statement, and quite a lot happens in the next 12 months. I'm sure you can already imagine. But let's look at the money for a second. So the money in the land transport system, the money that we deal with, largely comes by way of the boxes on the left, and the top two are the vastly largest, are the predominantly largest groups of that. So fuel excise duty and road user charges are the way we collect revenue that goes into the National Land Transport Fund. And all of that revenue comes into the National Land Transport Fund. None of it diverts off to the Crown anymore in terms of the consolidated fund. But as I said when I talked about regulation, we don't set the levels of those taxes. Right? Those are set by ministers and passed by Parliament. They are in law. So we don't have control over whether the money is too much or too little. I suspect we would struggle to ever argue that it was too much, but others will have a view about whether it's too much. But we don't set the level of that. And you will, or you may have noticed the minister making public comments in the last couple of weeks in context of the oil crisis that the announced intention to increase fuel excise duty and road user charges from 1 January next year, in his view, is politically unwise and may not occur. Now, to be fair, it has not been legislated for yet, but it is entirely within his and Parliament's control. The other three boxes, there's a bit of money that comes into the fund from motor vehicle registrations. Tolling doesn't make up much of the revenue at the moment, given the number of toll roads that we've got in the country. But it is meaningful in terms of paying off debt that was taken on in order to build things that were tolled in the past. But it is the sort of cycle in that sense. Other really doesn't cover much. But the two on the bottom, as you sort of skirt around this pooling diagram, Crown borrowing and Crown appropriations increasingly make up a significant proportion of the funds that we deal with. Different governments at different times make a decision on whether they're going to just give us the money by way of appropriation or they're going to give us a loan that then needs to be repaid. But either way, somewhere in the order of a quarter to a third of the money in the fund now comes to us by way of those two mechanisms. And particularly the borrowing, which needs to be repaid under reasonable short terms, has quite an impact in the available money in future years, because we're now at the point those loans are beginning to come due. So we need to start paying them back to the Crown.
Should be using road user charges to pay them back.
Yeah, that's right. 100%. Yeah, that's exactly right. So all that is, look, it's not unmeaningful. They've moved spending forward in time, but now we have to pay for that spending by way of paying the Crown back.
And that spending didn't relate to the right result as far as the network.
I won't make that judgment, but you're welcome to make whatever judgment you like in terms of where spend.
We're thinking having a whole lot of borrowing and still got a rusty old car.
Yeah, no, I think I know. I think I know where you're going, Stu. So the other point I'd make about Crown borrowing and Crown appropriations is, look, 10 years ago, that was very little. There was very little direct Crown money coming in. These days, because so much Crown money is coming in, and that is very clearly in order to ensure that there is more money available to spend on transport through us, without having to raise road user charges or fuel excise duty, because that money is coming from general taxation. It has given ministers the sense, entirely fairly, that they ought to be able to have more control over what is spent where. And so government policy statements have become increasingly directive, rather than just simply saying, look, these are the broad policy outcomes we'd like you to pursue, spend the money where it's best spent in order to get there. Increasingly, GPSs these days are full of lists, as I said, of road corridors or places where intervention is desired, and they are given the priority over everywhere else. And you see that most clearly with the roads of national significance under this government. But to be fair, prior to the election, the previous government and their draft GPS, which never became real because they had a list just like that. So they had a slightly different list. But we are now in the age of listed projects or listed corridors within the government policy statement. And I would say probably, frankly, because so much money is coming directly from ministers and the Crown, as opposed to through the traditional means of just gathering it from users.
So those roads of national significance, so the government says they want it. Are they then offering you Crown borrowing to do it?
They're not. So let me show you how that works. It's good. Nice pickup. So the other thing the GPS does is it creates activity classes, and that's just the Treasury's word for buckets of money. Ways of dividing up the overall amount of money. And these are the activity classes that the current government policy statement set up. The figures that are contained in those activity classes are ours. Those are numbers adopted by our board. but in response to a government policy statement that sets in each of those activity classes a minimum required level of investment and a maximum required level of investment. So the government policy statement does that, sets maximum and minima in each of them. And then our board has to balance that out with what's ready and what's needed and balance and what's coming through. So roads of national significance fall under that very first activity class, state highway improvements. The GPS says the number one priority of the government is making progress on roads of national significance. Yep. Here is the list of 17 roads of national significance we want the board to make progress on.
Choose 3.
No, it doesn't actually say choose 3. It says make progress on all of them. Thank you.
Okay.
South Island.
I was gonna ask you a question, Dana.
There are 2 in the South Island and none south of Canterbury. So our board looks at that list and then has to prioritise that. So spending on new infrastructure on the state highway network that isn't on a road of national significance has to fall behind those, because that is the government policy that we've been directed to implement. It isn't a choice by us. That is the direction that's given to us. And so for example, this 3-year period, what we have done is we have approved the investment cases, the business cases, if you will, for all of those 17 roads. So that isn't yet the building of them. That is a significantly more expensive ask, but we have progressed. We have made material progress on all of those 17. Right? There is a secondary list that sits under that for state highways, what the government has called roads of regional significance. Things like Ashburton Second Bridge sit there. Things like the Queenstown package that we have currently funded, or the part of the Queenstown package that we have funded, is a road of regional significance, and that pulls that secondary group up ahead of anything else, except for roads of national significance. So you can see how far ministers are reaching in to determine a priority order in order to get what they want. Now, they're not reaching so far as to saying, spend this money now here, right? They're right at the edge of what the legislation allows. Our board can say, no, we think progressing the RON and the road of national significance in Tauranga now, and the one in South Auckland, and I'm completely making up examples. This isn't actually what they did, but that might have to wait for a year. That's still a decision left to our board, and how much, where, and all of that. But the fact that those are prioritised ahead of anything else, that is just Crown policy.
So the frustrating part, like you talked just about Queenstown.
Yeah.
At our last meeting, is like, is there money available? We're going to have these fast track or other jobs happening, and you unequivocally said no.
There isn't.
No, I come back to this meeting and go, well, I've been with the NZTA and there's no money, but we're trying to push a plan for through the Nevis or growth in Queenstown as a regional deal. And I'm going, but it can't fit because one of it, but then in that situation, the government can change its priorities at the drop of a hat in that policy statement and
Correct.
change that after you and I have had discussions and it's not there.
Correct.
They're always careful to note that they cannot direct an independent board as to where they spend their money.
Yeah.
They just strongly suggest in the GPS.
But I guess the frustration for us is I've come back from a meeting with James and go to you guys, how can this regional deal work? Because there's no money there to do what they're saying. And then 2 weeks later, they can change it around. And
So yeah, no, you're absolutely right. So let's briefly dive into that as because it's worth exploring. So yeah, this gets updated typically every 3 years. So the next government policy statement might make representations to the minister that you want to be particularly enabling in a particular direction. Great, he might agree, you'll put it in. There are vehicles outside of GPS to do it. It is just a very public, very open, very obvious direction because it needs to be. Otherwise we get accused of playing games. And so, ministers give us letters of expectation every year. They contain details. That direction, the formal mechanism, that direction just gets tabled in Parliament. Right, so everyone can see that we have been directed to do something. Right? That's really the threshold. So you're right; they can't allow us to do a particular investment, but they can come pretty close if they're willing to come pretty close, and that's frankly all on how different communities make representations to them about what's important or not. Let me just unpack a bit more of what's going on in these activity classes so that you can see how much control a minister can have if they want to. So Simeon Brown, whose document this was, became Minister of Transport with a very clear view that we had not, as NZTA, and local government had not collectively spent enough money on the condition of the road. There were far too many potholes in New Zealand. Is the easy way to say it. And so, in order to compel us to spend more, he absolutely increased the amount of money available. But what he did, it's hard to see because the text is hard to read, and I apologise about it. The second and the third for state highways, and then the fourth, the fifth, and the sixth on the top row. So state highway pothole prevention and state highway operations, and then the local road equivalents are the same. He created those two buckets where only one for each existed. Right. So there used to just be a state highway maintenance and operations bucket and a local road maintenance and operations bucket. And the minister cut them in two and created one for state highway, one for local, but one pothole prevention bucket, and said the money in this bucket can only be spent on reseals, rehabilitations, and drainage work on the road, directly on road condition. And dialed the minimum amount of money that needed to be spent in that category up reasonably high, telling us to then fund ourselves in local government to spend more on road condition. Same time, therefore, other areas had to be dialed back because everything has to balance. That's the point. So within everything, some other areas got dialed back, but operations, the other side of what used to be a single bucket, got dialed back. And so that other operational activity out on the road, everything from structure that has to pay for everything for like structure inspections to, and I hesitate to raise it, but I won't get out of here alive if I don't raise it anyway. So we'll come to things like rubbish removal and weed clearing and making things look good, which is sits on the operations side. That gets dialed back in order to spend money on pavement condition. That is entirely the expression of a minister's priorities and achieved by controlling the funding mechanisms. Still our board's decision where to invest, who gets more money, when and how, but really screwed down tightly in order to make sure at a policy level we're very clear on what the government needs to see.
Sorry, can I just ask for sort of clarification? So state highway improvements, the 7.01 billion.
Yep.
Is that purely for roads of national significance?
It's for every improvement on the state highway network. Right. But as I said, the priority expressed in the government policy statement for that money is on that 17. So we need to have been clear we are making the progress the government wants to see on those 17 before we go off and do other state highway activities.
So roads of regional significance would come underneath that.
Yeah,
well.
Think of that as number 2 on the priority list after the first category, which is the 17 roads. And yeah, absolutely. So that figure, just to be clear, that's a 3-year expenditure figure.
Yeah.
So James, having that like state highway pothole prevention, has it given you the ability to spend more time on maintenance rather than beautification? So is it?
Absolutely.
Has it made it?
Oh no, we have absolutely. I'm confident in saying we have lifted our spend and the outcome on the state highway, on the road condition state highway. But I would also say we were very clear in our advice to the minister at the time that it will take about 10 years of that kind of sustained investment to get it back to where it was.
One would ask, why did you not do it 10 years ago?
Because we were directed not to. In the same, you
would have thought it'd be a logical thing on a roading network to be directed to.
So let's go back. It's more than 10 years, Stu. Let's go back to when Stephen Joyce was Minister of Transport. Same instrument existed back then. Used the government policy statement to tell us effectively to sweat the asset, to slowly, and it was slow. Let's be clear. Took a while, but to slowly reduce the condition of the asset in order to spend money elsewhere. It's all about choices, right? And we set maintenance contracts up in order to be able to do it in that particular way. And we've just exited those as of 1 May. We've entered new contracts in order to achieve this kind of outcome. Totally just giving effect to government policy. So Yep, that's the mechanism.
This is really the biggest challenge we'll face in a long-term plan. And Curtis and I, used to be Tracy and I, but Curtis and I on the road now, is I want to put the rates up. I want to put more money into the infrastructure because we'll get to exactly the same place where we're obviously just coming out of.
Yep.
And if we want to get those desired outcomes, it only comes at the expense of money.
And look, to be clear, so the minister sent the signal, I want to see more investment on potholes, on road condition. We responded with a bid because we bid, and I'll come to our process too. We bid into it ourselves just the way you bid into. We all bid collectively as a country for vastly increased spending on road condition. None of us received what we actually asked for, and definitely not local government. I don't think there was a council in the country that received everything they asked for us on that pothole prevention side. So you all responded, you all heard the signal, went, great, let's get on with it. Here's our bid. And we turned around a few months later and said, sorry, you'll only get about 80% of what you asked for. But simply, again, because of how all of the numbers have to balance out across all of the competing priorities. But you were absolutely up for doing more.
Yeah, and so therefore I get in the future, and I'm saying, well, the regional deal sort of doesn't feel like it gives us a central target or anything, but actually significantly, if the government's putting pots of money out in other places, it may be a help. Because if you really want to help your network, by giving us another 3% on our unsubsidised road, and we can add to the value of your infrastructure, for be the cheapest investment you ever made, but we're not getting it.
I'll try hard not to comment on regional deals because I'm not party to the negotiations, although I'm aware. So
it's the only sort of, I guess I'm saying it's the only thing that'll give us a chance of maybe grabbing funding.
Yeah, any mechanism where, frankly, you can get in front of a minister and be clear about your priorities and get hope. I understand that they heard that and that they're taking. I think it's always valuable, right? I mean, we are lucky in New Zealand that actually it's quite easy, relatively speaking, to get in front of a minister and be clear about what it is.
But our roles to get in front of you to make sure we get a bigger share of your.
Absolutely. No, don't. That's right. Don't forget me.
You
That's
like
right.
mutton.
But again, I can only deliver this.
Thing that's not trying to drive a government commercial.
Thank you.
About that far, right?
Oh, I've got a slide. I'll come to it. I will get there, I promise, because it's important. So let's talk about how we then run that mechanism. Well, no, hang on. One last comment on here. Pivot. So these are the current activity classes, but I hope I've made it clear. Minister Bishop could come up with his own. I mean, Simeon Brown just simply divided two activity classes and created four. But other ministers have, the walking and cycling activity class didn't exist 10 years ago, for example. All sorts of things can change. It is entirely up to ministers. And so one, I think you should be creative in what you would creative and clear about what you would like to see when the opportunity to comment arises. But also don't be surprised. That is to say, I think sometimes we can all fall into the sin of a lack of imagination here and then be surprised when something swings dramatically. None of this is set in stone. It is entirely up to ministers to create these activity classes and to give effect to the policy that they think is the most important. So I'm just urging you, to be aware of how fluid it can be, and also just to take whatever opportunities you can to represent yourselves and your community as these things get written, because once they get locked in, they get locked in for usually about 3 years. So talk about bidding. Just as you as a council are busy building your long-term plans and your road maintenance program and your transport program over the next 3 + 7, so 10 years, we love acronyms in NZTA, and ours is the SHIP. We build our plan as to bid in for the next 10 years. We have a draft SHIP at the moment. I will be in a position to share what is in it at some stage. I certainly hope to be able to. It will largely be dictated, of course, by what is available in the GPS, because 100% of our funding comes through mechanism of the GPS, whereas you at least have the ability, as painful as it can be, but you do have the ability to do unsubsidised work outside of the funding mechanisms that we operate. But we have now built for this cycle our draft of the State Highway Investment Proposal. We're busy refining it now and waiting for signals from the draft GPS. We take that program just as you take the transport component of your long-term plan. And we drop it at the Regional Transport Committee into the Regional Land Transport Plan. So the RTC, which I think is meeting here in a fortnight's time. This year, yep. We'll be busy pulling together the next iteration of the Otago Regional Land Transport Plan. That really, at its most basic, is the regional synthesis of all of the council's transport programs and the regional component, the Otago component of the State Highway Investment Proposal. We do regional ranking of that proposal. The RLTP has to be consistent with the GPS. It's not particularly difficult to be consistent with a government document like that, but that word is important because there's a higher bar to follow to jump over when we get to the national. But the important thing is by, let's say, March next year, we will have a new Otago Regional Land Transport Plan that will be consistent with the draft GPS because it will only still be drafted by that stage. And then it comes to us at NZTA and we pull all of those regional land transport plans together and we produce the National Land Transport Plan. The National Land Transport Plan has to give effect to the government policy statement. So it is a higher bar of consistency. And so sometimes things that are very important in a regional context and are still consistent with the GPS can't get funded, even though they're regional priorities at a national level because they don't give effect to the government policy statement because that's the threshold, that's the sieve. But we are required to issue this by the end of August next year. We've tried, and in some years, quite some time ago, we were quite good at getting them out earlier. The last 2 times, so the last 6 years, we've issued them right at the very end, August, and that is into the financial year. The financial year has already begun, in July, but we are really held by how long it will take the government to confirm the next version of the government policy statement. So I come back to the draft. Let me walk through the time frame one more time. Draft is issued by the minister, let's just broadly say middle of the year this year. You'll have an opportunity to comment on it because it's a public consultation exercise. Other parties will issue probably their transport policies off the back of it because they become effectively their version of a draft GPS. We have an election in November. Whatever the outcome of that is, whatever the makeup of the government is, will naturally impact how much change needs to occur between the draft that was issued middle of the year and the draft that they want to issue again post-election. And this is what happened last time round in 3 years ago. They'll go out for public consultation. Might be quite a short public consultation if they think it was pretty clearly obvious and pretty clearly aired during the election, but nonetheless, you'll get that confirmed March, April next year. That gives us enough time to lock down all of the planning documents, us to change any advice that we've already given you, because we'll be issuing advice from like this year, but it might have to change if the GPS changes, right?
The government.
Sorry?
Or the government.
Yep, absolutely. And then we can suck all those plans together, quickly order them and issue a national land transport program.
So you'd argue there wouldn't be much change in your GP, your policy statement now because it's too short a time frame and it's not an election winning thing, the government transport policy statement, that you'd argue there shouldn't be a lot of change as far as, well, it would be a big move to make a big change from where it is now to on an election cycle. Or is that just wishful thinking?
I'm not sure. I honestly, Stu, I don't know. It's not my job to.
I mean, I guess the real risk is we swing all the way one way and swing all the way back, and we don't actually our carriageway stays the same.
Yeah, well, that is a risk, and I think there's been a reasonable amount of comment at the political level about the risks of swinging dramatically. But it's certainly possible, is what I would tell you. There's no law.
Well, it has been now.
So that's for politicians to decide, voters to decide against politicians. We'll just do what we're told once we get it. But it is worth paying attention to because it's possible. You'll have a view about what's desirable from your community's point of view.
No matter what happens, really, at the bottom of the South Island, there's not a lot of money that even feels that comes this way. If it does, we go to Tiana or some of those tourist high network tourist routes. So for us, we don't really want to be expecting too many positive surprises, I guess I'm saying.
But, you know, I mean, in that sense, come back to a comment you made earlier, you'll want to see enough investment and maintenance of your existing assets, right? That's the bottom line, I would have thought, for you guys. Which brings me to this slide, and I promised we'd get there.
Marvelous.
So whatever,
James.
whatever we do end up funding for local government, the mechanism for funding is this, is funding assistance rates. We haven't yet got to the point in the cycle where we've told you what the magic number is, but we're close, and I promise, you know, it is coming. The board has confirmed effectively a continuation of the existing policy. So the existing policy is, broadly speaking, we drop districts' deprivation and a few other factors into an algorithm. So we effectively rank districts by deprivation, you know, how deprived are the communities that you represent. And the most deprived ends up at 75%. I know it says 88%. 88% is what the Chatham Islands get. They stand well outside the normal bell curve. The normal range is 75 to 51. And so it's 75%, so it's Buller District.
It's closer to 51.
And the majority of councils, so it's not a straight ranking by any means, the majority of councils actually sit at 51 or very close to 51. And yourselves attract 51. So 51 is the floor in the policy. If we didn't have a floor, it would drift councils even lower, and 75 is the ceiling. Again, some councils would drift higher, with the exception of Chatham's, because it just simply doesn't make sense to treat them like everyone else. But we will run those numbers, and we will come to you and tell you what that number is.
One of the things that we are continually left at a disadvantage for in this area in Queenstown Lakes next door is that when you look at our deprivation, it is pulled way up by effectively a few individual properties. We do have one of the lowest far rates in the country, and I think the last time I looked, the only one lower than us was Christchurch City, but that was because everything was brand new in their district. And we'd all paid for it out of the kindness of our hearts as taxpayers. Our far rate for our last round worked out to be effectively 38%, because there was so much stuff that actually had to be done. We were just funded by ratepayers. So is there a recognition when you plug that into the database that our numbers are skewed in a particular demographic because of property prices here? And that when you're looking at a deprivation scale, we actually do have some areas that are really deserving of some additional funding that are not picked up in that far rate calculation.
The simplest answer to your question is no, but actually it is slightly more complicated than that. So let me try to. So if that's the kind of change you want, by all means, you should write to me. We'll talk to the board. You know, that would be a change in the FAR policy in general. It's not unheard of, but it's not likely. A different example is Southland District are quite clear, as are others, but Southland's the loudest, wanting those top and bottoms to a bit, particularly the bottom to be improved, so that large councils like Auckland would slide lower than 51, therefore releasing more money to subsidise other councils. Right? They're very clear about that as a desired change of policy, and you should absolutely feel free to advocate singularly to me and us, or collectively with whatever grouping of local government and other voices you want to try to get to. That's fine. But even in the absence of changing that policy, so strictly the policy would be no, something else is going on there, and really Stu's kind of alluded to it. If the GPS so constrains the amount of money available in the area that you want to do that work, let's just broadly call it maintenance, because I think that is largely what we're talking about, that we have to dial back the amount of money that is available to you, and you say, no, this is so important to us, we're going to do it anyway, therefore it's unsubsidized, uncomplicated, but thus reducing the total amount of money that, you know, the proportion of money we're giving to you, to bring it down, let's just broadly say it in 30s. What you really want is more money at the top dedicated to maintenance, so there is more money to support your bid when you come to bid for it. That's a strict policy choice that is entirely within the hands of ministers, right? You don't want as much money spent on bright, shiny new things because you don't want a bright, shiny new thing. You want to maintain what you've got.
And that's our size is our problem.
Yep.
then.
Do you think that the fact that we have in the past done more because it actually needed to be done and therefore itself reduced our FAR rate,
No.
is that going to have a detrimental impact when it comes to NZTA?
No, it actually
Saying,
has.
oh no, they've obviously got the money, so they don't.
No, it actually has the opposite, to be fair. No, to be clear. So when we come to assess individual bids at that point, so you all put your program in, we're assessing your bid, how much do we give each one? We look at a few things. We look at how much work you actually undertake. We look at the need, we look at the condition, but we look at your success. How good are you at actually delivering the program that you say you want to do? Because look, to be honest with you, some councils are very good at bidding for a lot and then not doing a lot.
Right, absolutely. And I guess for us though, going forward in that 10, 20-year plan, we've got growth that the rest of the part of the country hasn't. So the extra assistance that could be required to make a first-class job and deliver it on time is only beneficial to the government, NZTA, the whole tourism, the whole New Zealand.
So those are all things I think that you can find relief in wording that